Hello again everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In the studio, again, I have the Raspberry Pi 400 right here. I did a review on this one recently, and ever since then, I was looking for an excuse to show it off again, because this is an awesome computer. It kind of reminds me of the Commodore 64 back in the day, because, well, like that one, it's a keyboard that's built into the computer itself, and it hooks up to a television, well, technically a monitor, but nowadays, a television and a monitor are essentially the same thing, so it kind of makes me think of it as a modern-day Commodore 64, which is pretty cool. But after I did that review, I was kind of thinking, okay, now what? I wanted to show it off again, and more importantly, I wanted to find something to use it for. I have all kinds of computers. I didn't actually need the Pi 400, but I wanted to do a video on it because I think it's a cool idea. So ever since then, I was thinking, okay, what can I use it for? Where should I actually install this? And what could I do with it? And I came up with a pretty fun idea. I decided to try to run some DOS games on it, some classic DOS games. And that's exactly what I'm going to do in today's video. But before we get into that, I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor for today's video, Linode. Linode has been doing cloud computing since 2003, which is actually before Amazon Web Services was even a thing. On Linode's platform, you can get your server up and running in minutes, and they include all of the popular distributions such as CentOS, Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora, and get this, also Arch Linux. And let's be honest, what could be better than a Linux cloud server provider that allows you to tell all of your friends, I run Arch? Linode has multiple server plans available to make any app scalable and flexible. You can use it to host a blog, set up a VPN server, a Minecraft server, or you could do what I did and set up a website for your YouTube channel, because the official website for Learn Linux TV runs on Linode. And Linode offers 24/7 365 support regardless of plan size, so you can get live help from a real person when you need it. New users can get started right now with $100 in credit towards a new account, and I highly recommend you check them out because Linode is awesome. For this particular project, I decided to go with RetroPie, and that's exactly what I installed on my Pi 400. And one of the things that I like most about it is that for each game, you can actually scrape data from online sources to fill in metadata about the game, so when you scroll through the list, you actually see some details for each game. And the interface couldn't be simpler. You just choose which game you want to run. So, for example, I could run Doom 2. And you even see all of the DOS information and loading screens that you would see on a real DOS computer, which is awesome. To get it set up, I went to the official RetroPie website, I downloaded the latest image of RetroPie, and then I used USB Imager to flash it to an SD card. After that, I inserted the SD card into the Pi 400, powered it on, and then RetroPie started booting up. And just like always, when it boots for the first time, it's going to resize the file system to match the boundary of the SD card. Basically, to make sure you get to take advantage of all of the available space on that SD card. And then it reboots again, and I was ready to go. Next, I configured RetroPie to enable SSH, and that's the method that I like to use to log in and configure things behind the scenes. And for that, I opened up raspiconfig, and then I went down to Interface Options, and then down to SSH. And then when asked, do you want the SSH server to be enabled, I responded with yes, and then it was enabled. On the file system, inside the home directory for the Pi user, you have a few folders there. For example, RetroPie and RetroPie Setup. And inside the RetroPie Setup directory, you have RetroPie Setup.sh. So basically what I did was I ran that as root. And then I went down to Manage Packages, and then Optional Packages, and then I went down to DOSBox. DOSBox is not enabled by default, but it's very easy to actually install this, so I pressed Enter on this. And then I chose the option Install from Precompiled Binary. Then I chose yes. And then it was installed. Back at the home directory, inside there we also have a RetroPie folder. And inside there we have a ROMs folder. So I went into the ROMs folder, then the PC folder, and that's actually where I set up the games. As you can see here, I have a configuration file for each of the games that I currently have installed on the Pi 400. To avoid having 2 items for every game in the menu, I made all of the folders that contain the actual files for the games hidden. So if I enter ls and then -a to show hidden files, you'll see that I have a .data folder right here, and that's actually where I installed all of the game files to. Inside there, I have a folder for each of the games that I wanted to have installed on the Pi 400. And I added the .pc extension for each of the folders, and then I also have this right here, a directory for ultrasound, which is kind of like a special sound driver for some DOS games to give them even better sound. That was required for Mortal Kombat 3. And what I'll do is I will open up a config file and show you what it looks like. So I'm going to warn you that some of the settings I have here might not be the best. I'm still tweaking the settings for each game, but essentially what you have is a config file for DOSBox, and you could grab the DOSBox config file from the .dosbox directory in the home directory to use as a template. I copied it to this directory, and then I started changing the settings here. And I will actually have a link in the description below that goes to the Wiki article for this video, where I will actually have the config files for each game if you want to go ahead and check them out and see if the settings work for you as well. Your mileage may vary, but I figured it would be helpful for somebody out there to include my config files. If nothing else, you can use them as a starting point, and if you find better settings than what I have, well, let me know. Anyway, if I scroll down a bit, we see some of the magic in how this works. Now this auto exec section right here is where you put all of the DOSBox commands that you want to run to launch the game. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm mounting a directory to act as the C drive for DOSBox, and the directory that I'm mounting specifically is going to be the folder for this particular game. And here, Mortal Kombat 3 actually has CD quality sound, so I wanted to make sure that I was able to hear actual music and sound effects. So what I did was I created a bin.q image from the actual MK3 physical CD-ROM. Then I saved that image to the file system, and I'm using the command that you see here to mount that image as a virtual CD-ROM drive, which will mean that DOSBox is able to access it and I'm able to hear the audio. And then here I am mounting the U drive, and that goes to the ultrasound directory. Again, some games use that, not a ton of them, but every now and then you'll run into a game that uses that, and what ultrasound will do is give you much better sound quality. And then here I'm telling DOSBox to go to the C drive, and then once there, run mk3.exe, and the 0666 option that you see at the end is a hidden option that you can append to the Mortal Kombat 3 executable to enable the hidden character in the game right from the beginning. And then at the end I have exit because once I'm done playing the game, well, I want it to exit. So now you saw how I've configured everything, but how did I actually get all of the games set up in the first place and get the files onto the file system? How did I actually install the games? Well, actually, I decided to go with physical games for this project. I am a collector of classic retro games, so I really do prefer to have the physical games whenever I can. So I just went on an eBay shopping spree and bought a bunch of games. And there's other DOS games that I ordered as well, but given the state of the world and the postal system in the United States, not all of the games arrived on time for me to record the footage. Now I did buy some older Windows games as well, for example Myst and Ribbon, but as of the time I recorded this video, I wasn't able to find out how to get those to work just yet, so for now at least I'm going to stick to the DOS games. And boy do I have some awesome DOS games to show off. And I got a hold of some very, very awesome DOS games, some of my all-time favorites. For example, SimCity 2000. How awesome is that? I was able to find it complete in box on eBay. So I have SimCity 2000 and all of the manuals and everything it came with, which is awesome. In addition to that, I ordered a compilation of Wizardry games, and Wizardry is one of those PC RPG series that not a lot of people know about, but I absolutely love this series. It's one of my favorites of all time. And there were actually ports of the Wizardry games to the 8-bit NES and 16-bit SNES as well, and those versions are technically better than the PC versions, but we'll let that go for this video. But the Wizardry series is great, and it's an absolute crime that more people don't know about it. The first Wizardry game came out way back in 1981, so it's quite old, and it looks like it too, but it offered surprising depth for that period of time. Now, to a limited extent, your actions actually influenced the party of characters that you travel with. If you make a decision while you're in the dungeons that the other characters in your party don't like, they may not be able to be in the party with that character anymore, and your alignment can change from good to neutral to evil, and so on. And some of the character classes were actually limited to certain alignments, which means you weren't able to, say, have a ninja party up with a paladin or equivalent. So it was a very surprisingly complex system for 1981, and the remakes made the series even better, but not all of the games actually got remakes, and then the Wizardry series kind of fizzled out. But I just think it's amazing to have the first 7 games in one set. But when it comes to playing classic games, you really can't do so without playing at least one version of Doom, so I ordered Ultimate Doom and Doom 2 as well. And I'm also a fan of Mortal Kombat, and believe it or not, the DOS versions of the Mortal Kombat games were great.
Round 1, fight! Well done.
I wasn't able to get a hold of Mortal Kombat 2 or Mortal Kombat Trilogy in time for this video, but I did get Mortal Kombat 3 in time. In fact, I've had it for years, and I went ahead and installed that as well. And when it comes to the Mortal Kombat games, the home ports, in my opinion, were generally pretty terrible. I mean, they were okay in the 90s because that's basically all we had. The Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions were decent, but compared to the arcade versions, they were inferior. Even back then, the arcade versions had CD quality sound and basically 32-bit graphics, so quite a lot of detail was lost when those games were converted to the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. The DOS versions of many of the games, in my opinion, were actually the closest to being arcade perfect that we had at the time, and the quality was much, much, much better than the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions. For example, here's the character select screen on Mortal Kombat 3 for DOS. Here's that same screen on the Super Nintendo version. And here's the Sega Genesis version. And now, back to the DOS version. You should definitely be able to see the difference, not only in the quality in the sprites, but the soundtrack as well. Now, the process of setting up the Pi 400 to play these old games was a little challenging, to be honest. So what I did was I reached for an external CD-DVD drive and I attached it to the Pi 400. I inserted a CD for a particular game, and then I ran the installer. And you could probably make a valid argument that there's better and faster ways of installing these old games, but there's just something about inserting the CD and running the actual installer that just felt like a glorious blast from the past. And growing up, I didn't even have access to a computer at all. I didn't even get one until I was 19, so by the time I started playing with these older games, they were already old. So I was very late to the party, but I still enjoyed these games quite a bit. So after I inserted the CD, and then I mounted the CD to the file system, I just used DOSBox within RetroPie to go ahead and run the installer. Once it was done, I was able to fire up the games, and well, they kind of worked. They needed to be adjusted and have various settings tweaked. And the thing is, it was a little challenging to actually get this video made because I've had some of these games for quite a while now, and it just took a lot of fine-tuning to get them to work right. I Googled like crazy to find the best DOSBox settings for each game, and some of the settings I found online were okay. Other things didn't work as well as I would have liked, but eventually I was able to get every game working with fairly decent performance. So for example, here's SimCity 2000 running on the Pi 400. SimCity 2000 has been one of my favorite games for a very, very long time. The thing is though, since I didn't have an actual computer growing up, I did get a hold of a PS1 and the PlayStation version of SimCity 2000, which I liked quite a bit. It used virtually the entire memory card, so it was a little bit expensive. I had to sacrifice saves of other games to basically grow my city, but it was still a blast to play. When it comes to the wizardry games, you could definitely argue that they didn't age very well. The first game in the series was released all the way back on the Apple II, so adjust your expectations accordingly, but despite the fact that the graphics leave a lot to be desired, these games were great. But as much as I do love these games though, Wizardry 1, 2, and 5 were all released on the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo, and I highly recommend those versions of those games much more than I'd recommend the PC versions of those games because they're much, much better. But again, not all of the wizardry games were remade onto console versions, so the other games in the series, you're basically stuck with the older looking graphics. But despite how the graphics haven't aged all that well, Wizardry is a great series. It's very, very brutal. Characters are able to die permanently, meaning that all of the months that you might have spent basically leveling up a character could be for nothing if that character is destroyed in the dungeon. And essentially what you do is you navigate the dungeon. Most of the games have just one dungeon that spans multiple levels, and the goal is to get to the end. And that sounds very simple, and it is, but the party mechanics, basically how you level up your party members, the classes that you assign them, and the combinations that you include in your party, as well as the actions that you make within the dungeon, are all things that you have full control over and give you quite a few strategic options. And of course we have Doom. I don't know why, but Doom 2 is actually my favorite in the series. Again, I don't know why, I just love that game, it's great. So that was actually one of the first that I've installed on the Pi 400, and it was a lot of fun to play. It did take a bit of tweaking for me to get it working, but as you can see, it seems to work quite well once you get it configured properly. In the description below, I will have a link to the Wiki article for this video where you can grab a copy of my config files if you want to try settings similar to mine. And if you get any of the games that I'm running better on your end, then let me know how you did it because, well, I'm always wanting to improve it. Running classic games on the Pi 400 is a great project to work on. It's just awesome. You have a computer that's built into a keyboard after all. DOS games use the keyboard. The desktop kit comes with a mouse. So other than a display, you basically have everything you need to run retro DOS games. And then you could just take this with you wherever you go, maybe to a friend's house or something. You could even have a LAN party of Pi 400s all configured with the same game and then, network them together. And you can simulate network LAN parties of the 90s, which is even cooler. Now, unfortunately, this video didn't come out as a tutorial because I don't know what games you might want to run on your end, and the settings and configuration is going to change from one to another. But essentially what you do is you have a config file for each game. You put that in the associated directory. Basically, the RetroPie directory has a ROMs directory. Inside there is a PC directory. And I added all of the games there in that directory as hidden files. And then I had the configuration files exposed so I wouldn't see duplicate entries in the menu. And then if configured properly, you can use the controller and select the game that you want to play and then play it with the keyboard. And I have to say, this project was a lot of fun. Now, unfortunately, like I mentioned, I wasn't able to get some of the PC games that I've purchased, such as Myst, set up and running on the Pi 400, but I do intend to work on that in the future. But in the meantime, if you are looking for an awesome project to work on and you are a fan of older games like I am, the Pi 400 is a very, very good way to actually run your old DOS games. So I hope you like this video. I hope it's inspired you to run some older games on your Pi 400. And in the meantime, I have some great videos coming very soon. I can't wait. So definitely subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.